An honor to be able to share with some of you some of the learnings that I have been able to make while practicing both the kata and Kanban together. That's going to be the premise of this talk here today. So a little bit about myself. Yes, that's a really big picture, and it looks weird up there. Looked better on the computer. Anyway, been practicing Kanban since 2012. I was actually part of a small team that was overburdened with work, burnt out. And as a result, we started to adopt Kanban. And the benefits of that over a year of practicing it were really life-changing for not only the team, but for myself. The team's performance within that aspect really became something of a case study. That was used across adoption of a much larger organization, which is actually Optum. And actually, there's another good talk going across the street right now there with Optum by Janine McGuire, who is a cohort of mine. Over time, I became something of a culture change advocate. And by the time I left in 2017, there were, for sure, 1,800 practitioners of Kanban actually practicing Kanban at Optum. All levels of maturity, obviously, but there's probably more than that. That's what we had quantifiable sort of evidence for. And because of that, through that process, I actually became something of an amateur student of psychology. So let's talk about sort of the grand visions of success that we start out with as practitioners when we're thinking about Kanban and practicing it. High performance, high output, increased employee engagement. That excites me as a manager. I want my employees to be really involved. I want them to really love what they're doing. Innovation, delivery zen, this fit-for-purpose model, right? I want that, and that's what we wanted, and we actually achieved that. But many teams didn't. And you come to them and you say, guys, I thought we were going to be this awesome samurai. What happened, right? And then you see low to moderate output. You see a lack of measurement and understanding around performance changes. You see this lack of innovation in general. And this pervading, just tell me what to do attitude. Austin Powers, great movie, by the way. And so, I would query people, try and get some feedback on, what happened, in this sort of failure or sort of mid-level stall out. And they'd give me feedback like, well, we had a lack of engagement. We plateaued at visualizing our work. We had poor data quality. We didn't have leadership buy-in. Our leaders were still being really prescriptive. They were still just, driving the work down our throats. Kanban became just a work categorization tool for us. I just want to see what we got. Well, it's good enough, right? We're doing Kanban. So as a coach and a catalyst, it feels like this. You have these aspirations, and it doesn't quite work out. And there's a common thread that I've actually seen that sort of pervades through all of that feedback. And it seems to be, in my opinion, a trifecta of a lack of organizational discipline, learning paralysis across the organization, and then also a lack of trust between the organization, stakeholder peers, leadership, and their teams. So why is this? All right, so I know everybody quotes Kahneman, and I was hesitating to bring Kahneman into the mix here, but I haven't found anything better that really explains why this is and how we actually think and interact as human beings. So Kahneman, review for probably most of you, but Kahneman wrote this book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman is his name. Great book if you haven't read it. And so he sort of categorizes our types of thinking into two slots. There's this system one type thinking. You can see that guy's leading right there, right? It's instinctive, it's intuitive, it's a rapid mode of sort of response. And it's the majority of how our decisions are actually made as human beings. Think of pattern matching. Think of sort of the knee-jerk reaction. Think of, if I say the phrase bread and, what do you think? Water? Yep. Anybody think of butter? Anybody think of jam? Okay, that's your system one thinking kicking in, right? Just matching to what we know. This type of thinking actually sort of generates and gets into sort of full force when we're about 9, maybe 7, somewhere around there. Second type of thinking is system 2 thinking. And it's what we actually think of when we think of what is thinking, right? That is this conscious, effortful, slow type of thinking. And it's how we learn. But again, it's not how most of our decisions are made. And starting Kanban is hard, right? I mean, when I started Kanban, that's kind of what it looked like to me. As an individual contributor, leading a team, trying to figure out, okay, what is this thing? How do I do this? It requires enormous amounts of system 2 type thinking in order to just build a board that reasonably relates to your value stream, right? Not to mention, you've got work in progress, recognizing bottlenecks, identifying your key, and analyzing key KPIs. I mean, this is system 2 just engaged incredibly. And Kanban's not prescriptive like other methodologies, like, say SAFe here, okay? I might get some slack here, but I mean, you not get, titles and sort of a flow and everything laid out for you. You have to figure it out as a team. That attracted me to Kanban, but it also was really hard, and it is, I think, a cause, and from what I've seen, in sort of this paralysis that sort of happens when teams try to adopt Kanban. In some cases, we also find, again, that just tell me what to do motto. And so again, looking at these other methodologies, that sort of appeals to them, right? So you couple that with your typical dysfunction in your organization, you've got quite a challenge towards adopting Kanban. So what we need to do is we need to retrain System 1. We need to hack System 1 to take on various attributes that encourage it to default to System 2 type thinking. And like learning any type of new discipline, it requires exercise and training. Enter Toyota Kata. So can I just get a raise of hands? How many of you have heard of Toyota Kata before? Okay, so like most of you, okay, that's good. How many of you have actually practiced some form of the kata before? Okay, maybe like a quarter of you, okay, good. So this will be a review to some of you, but again, so I'm going to go in just on what is a kata here. So let's start there. What is the kata? So traditionally, a kata is a form of practice within martial arts, and it's a choreographed set of patterns that are practiced in order to build muscle memory so that movements become second nature. And this is really so that when you're in a conflict or a stressful situation, you have the movements ready, right? So we're in a conflict situation, we're in a high-stress situation. Your limbic system kicks in. And that's your fight or flight response. And it just so happens, and this is well documented, that we don't make very good decisions when we're in a fight or flight response. So the idea here is to train your body to respond in a way that's helpful so that when you're in that limbic, response type situation, you just react, and it's the right reaction. So Toyota Kata is really analogous to that, right? The overall goal is to make System 1 default into the scientific method, effectively building it into the muscle memory of your mind and your culture. Toyota Kata, by the way, there's a great book on it written by Mike Rother. I won't go too much into that, but I highly recommend you guys check that out. It's in the end of the presentation. When you guys, you can take a look at it in the slides there. So what is this? This is neuroplasticity, guys. This is that guy right there. So it just so happens that neuroscience has observed and documented this. Actions and behaviors that we repeat intentionally or unintentionally can get woven into the neural structures of our brain. And they've actually seen this on functional MRIs, where the pathways between certain sort of nodes of the brain that are attributed to thought patterns can actually get strengthened and widened like highways that allow for your brain to be more I'll say, tending to going towards that particular type of thought or action. And so whatever we focus on and repeatedly do with enthusiasm tends to become our preferred way of thinking, acting, our mindset, our habits. And interestingly, this is also the way that we can deliberately modify our thinking or behavioral patterns. And so I'm going to propose 3 ways that the kata can augment Kanban. I found this through experience, and I'll share each of these with you, but there's 3 sort of overviews. First of all, it allows us to build team discipline. Secondly, it can help foster a culture of learning within your organization, thus providing an excellent foundation for a discovery process. And thirdly, practicing the kata actually provides a framework for building trust between leadership and their teams. So let's start with the most basic form of the kata. This is called the coaching kata. And it starts with a coach and a learner, and can be anybody, right? The coach can be a manager, the learner could be an individual contributor. You could switch those roles around. The coach could be a scrum master. Learners can be an individual contributor. Again, could be peers, anything. The point is, there's somebody who wants to learn, and there's somebody who's going to act as sort of a point to bounce those ideas off of. And so it starts like this. The coach asks the question, what's the target condition? And so this is sort of like an iterative state that the learner wants to attain. Secondly, the coach will ask the learner, well, what's your actual condition? What's going on? So this actually forces the learner to really assess the landscape of where things are at. Thirdly, the coach asks what obstacles, preferably one obstacle, but what obstacle is standing in your way from attaining that target condition? Now we're starting to get some solution problem solving going on there. Fourth, what's your next step? Well, now the learner is actually saying, okay, how am I going to get around this problem? I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. And then finally, and this is actually one of the most important things, the coach says, how quickly can we go and see what you have learned? Now this actually puts an expiration date on the learning. It makes that iterative short batch cycle actually happen. And if you don't do that, I've actually found that the katas will stretch on and on and on. We don't want that to happen. So I figured maybe we could practice this, and I'm wondering if anybody wants to be a volunteer and be a coach for me. Any hands? Come on, I'm going to pick somebody. All right. All right. Yeah, come on down. Or you can. I'll just hand you the mic. Let's start there.
Okay, walk down, walk down.
There you go. Walking, walking, walking. All right. So why don't we just start? Let's go ahead. You're the coach, and I'll be the learner, and let's go out. Let's get on here.
Well, what's your target condition?
So my target condition is I want to be able to have some level of coherency in my user stories when I'm writing them down. I'm an individual contributor, and I want it to be done in a timely manner.
Okay, so what's happening today?
It's not happening, man. I mean, I'll get my work done, and like a day or two later, I'll update my Kanban card, and it's just not.
It's not time.
It's not happening. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think's getting in the way of that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's all these meetings that are happening. It's like I got death by meetings. I'm always going to meetings, and I think that's stopping me from having time to actually put in my data in the Kanban cards.
Okay. All right. So what are you going to do about it?
I'm going to start canceling meetings, I think. Why not?
That sounds good.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Cool.
So how quickly will we know whether or not that's made a difference?
So how about next week?
Next week. Okay.
How about like Monday next week?
We'll check back in on Monday next week.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's it, guys. I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, right? But how often does that actually happen in your conversations? It usually is more along the lines of, hey, Mike, how's it going, dude? Hey, your user stories are like way out of date, man. What's going on there? Oh, I don't know, man. I'm just so busy. I don't know what to do. And that's it, right? It's like, well, dude, I need you to get your user stories up to date. And it happens over and over and over again, and no movement happens, right? This allows us to get that sort of leverage, to start getting system 2 engaged, to get us to that next point. So that was a simple example, but I've used the coaching kata to look at things like addressing issues with timely data entry, WIP limits, analytics, process improvement, and throughput. I've found that and often teams actually have a factor of 3 times in terms of improvement. Well, let me rephrase that. They take 3 times less than the teams that aren't practicing the kata along with Kanban to get to the point where they're mature. So it ends up being something of a meta-methodology, this scientific method in Toyota Kata. It becomes sort of foundational to how the organization can learn and improve together. All right, so the second aspect of the Toyota Kata. Wow, that really didn't show up good. I'm sorry, guys. That's supposed to be a really beautiful picture of a samurai. Anyway. The second aspect in which the kata augments Kanban is within the discovery realm. So we all want to have a learning culture in our organization. I've had so many CEOs, CTOs come to me and say, how do we inject some type of learning in our culture? How do we get people to spontaneously learn, to want to learn, to grow beyond their skill sets, to get T-shaped, so we can get to the point where we have T-shaped resources, things like that. How do we get there? In fact, I was just reading an article in the Harvard Business Review by Tony Schwartz, which was I think last month he published it, and it was titled Create a Growth Culture, Not a Performance-Obsessed One. And his idea of a growth culture is an environment that feels safe, focusing on continuous learning through inquiry, curiosity. Well, that sounds kind of familiar, okay. Time-limited manageable experiments. Again, wow, okay, kata, okay, that sounds good. And then continuous feedback. This, in his idea, or in his opinion, is that growth culture that goes beyond just obsessing about performance. And I agree. There's different ways that people have tried to attain this. There is sort of the lean startup feedback loop, right? You've got your new idea. You've got to test your new idea rapidly. Get that feedback as soon as possible. Validate it, drop it, move on, or deliver it. Fail fast, fail frequently in order to find that right thing. Rapid experimentation. We actually tried that. And so here's an example of a board that really is sort of preloaded towards discovery within a portfolio. There's multiple teams on this sort of value stream, and this whole section here is all just focused on discovery. And you can see here, there's a lot of work that we actually loaded in front to actually get going on that. And we expected there to be a lot of sort of variability and all the stuff that happens when you're doing discovery. But what we quickly learned is that we often lacked a way to show the succession of learnings and decisions that took us from the initiation of discovery to what we actually solutioned. So think about it. Leader comes and says, well, we need to deliver A, right? And the team goes and does a whole bunch of research, does discovery and experiments, and a week later comes back and says, well, I know you said A, but X is the way to go. And the leader's like, what? Come on, man. What's going on? Discovery takes us down unexpected paths. There's learning that happens there. And so we found we needed to have a way to leave like a breadcrumb trail, if you will, for that learning. And so the second type of kata I'm going to share with you today is one that actually has been sort of coined by Melissa Perry. I don't know if you know Melissa Perry, but Melissa Perry is a really great product management UX coach. And she came up with this idea of the product kata. And I love this. I've used it quite extensively with my teams. So first of all, some things that are different here. Notice there's a goal, and again, I'm sorry this didn't render very well, but it actually is a grid. So there's a goal that's set by a high-level leader. That's our overarching organizational strategy that we need to attain. Then there's the target condition that's set, right? One thing I forgot to mention is this is actually practiced at the team level rather than at the individual level. So it's a little bit different there. And so your target condition is actually set by the team, and then you iterate. And you can see there's, again, something that looks somewhat familiar there, current condition, obstacle, step. What's expected, which is a little bit different, and I actually like this because it helps you to sort of look at where are your cognitive biases, right? What did I expect to actually happen? And then what did you actually learn as a team? And this actually iterates. You can iterate through a number of these. So you have a whole sheet of these sort of linear progressions of iterative learning in one kata. And I've actually seen this map really well to Kanban, sort of in a tightly coupled manner. So if you can see up there, and again, I'm really sorry this didn't render as good as I had hoped. There's sort of a feature level Kanban card up there, and I actually find that the target condition maps really well to that, especially if you embed that in the description somehow within your feature. And then secondly, I've actually found that the user stories map really well to the iterative learning. So we'd have multiple user stories go across the board, and we'd have learnings attached to each of those user stories. Again, this is an experiment. It's something that worked well for us. I encourage you to try it on your own, and maybe you'll find a better way to do it. Here's a practical example of that. So here's a team that's an infrastructure, multi-million-dollar infrastructure project. And they had to figure out a new platform to host these super massive virtual machines, or VMs we call them in the IT space. And so they went through these multiple iterations of learning to get to a conclusion. And a couple of notes here. First of all, the team and the leaders had preconceived notions of what that solution was going to be. I mean, I had a leader come to me and was like, yeah, I know you're going to deliver this, but go through the kata anyway, just see what you come up with, And secondly, there's sort of this dysfunction within the engineering realm where there's often like a shotgun approach to solutioning, where engineering would just come up with this way to solve a problem, and they say, okay, everybody else, this is the solution. Deal with it, right? This is what we're going to deliver. So let's go through with this team and kind of look at their learning. So first of all, the team figured out, okay, well, the customer's use cases are legitimate. That's something that we needed to verify. Do we really need extra large virtual machines within our offerings, right? Secondly, they found, well, okay, we're going to need a new platform. Our current platform doesn't work. We're going to need a new hosting platform for that. Next, they found out what the right platform was. And lastly, they found out that we actually had to pivot our strategy in how we hosted those virtual machines. All that learning right here in this sheet. So following up on those 2 points I made earlier, what was being prescribed here was actually heretical to some degree to the preconceived notions that the leaders actually had in mind at the time. And so this allowed us to not only convince the leaders to pivot their idea, but it also allowed for these leaders to take up a more paneled approach to decision making to actually approve this, because everybody could look at the data. It was right in front of them. So there we've got a way to predispose the conversation towards discovery, further enforcing that culture of learning that we all want to see grow in our organizations. All right, I know this is a controversial slide, but let's talk about a leadership pathology here, okay? Yeah, so a common anti-pattern that I have experienced is that sometimes leaders distrust teams to give them honest answers. Sound familiar to anybody here? And they distrust them on, why they came to the decision, or a particular direction, or technology, something like that. That, in their mind, often forces them to be overly prescriptive and many times leads them to ineffective decision making. Now, on the other side, leaders are often made to be scapegoats, sometimes wrongly so, sometimes rightly so, because of overly prescriptive decision making. And again, other pathological behaviors that I won't get into, but and so we want learning leaders, right? But why is this happening? Well, this is actually a quote that I got from a leader, and I'm going to share this with you. So often leaders who come from individual contributor roles maintain this false narrative that they have to have all the answers, right? So leaders feel like they've got to have the answers. This is something that it's like just embedded within their psyche. And thus they sort of end up following this Taylorian style management, right? Which is highly prescriptive. But it ends up being so stifling to team innovation. So if you practice the kata, and I've seen this over and over again, along with Kanban, you build a framework that allows leaders to change that behavior and to learn alongside their teams by following the cognitive breadcrumbs that their team leaves behind. And that could be that document like the kata that we just saw in the product kata, or it could be documenting the coaching kata that somebody in the team is going through. And it allows them to build trust in the decisions that the team are making. I mean, this goes both ways, right? I mean, you can't just say, "Hey, leaders, trust me now," right? They're gonna say, "Well, okay, show me. I can trust you," right? And it also gives a place for the leaders to live. Now, remember, I said that goal up there. I mean, that is a functional way to help guide your high-level leaders to help stay in that direction strategy area of the team interaction, right? If you think about this, mission command is another name for this type of leadership, right? So here's some feedback that I got from a senior director, which I think illustrates my point nicely. My team actually put a kata together, and he went through and read that in about 20 minutes and was able to inform his VP not only on what the team had figured out and where their actual position was in the decision-making process, but he also was able to learn alongside with us without having to be in sort of a controlling position. Again, sounds so simple, but this type of behavior I see over and over again in large organizations, and it's just so powerful if you can actually use these methodologies with that. So, in conclusion, returning to these three facets, Toyota Kata brings with Kanban discipline, discovery, trust. I would take that farther and actually say that the use of Toyota Kata is an exercise that fixes the way we think and allows us to practice Kanban more effectively, realizing the benefits more quickly of the actual methodology. So I've got some reading here, but I want to open it up to questions if anybody has any questions.
There's one question online, it looks like. How do you handle people who are non-committal or vague with their answers during coaching?
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you. You have to sort of guide them, right? This is where I came back to this idea of being a student of psychology. And so when they are practicing the kata with you, you have to be, as a coach, there to help sort of interpret. If they're kind of coming at it from a side angle, kind of say, okay, so what does that mean, right? How does that relate to this problem? So it does require some level of psychology, I think, as a coach. And the more the learners actually go through the process, the more they start to feel comfortable with it, and actually the faster they progress in their learnings. Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate your time.